So you've just played a terrible game. I mean, so bad that your eyes are bleeding. You have nightmares about it. Just terrible. Terrible. And you want to warn other people about it. Well, that's where the game review comes in. A game review is just simply your opinion on the game that you just played. Now, game reviews are very subjective. As I said, it is an opinion. So whether or not people agree with your opinion does not really matter. It is your opinion. Now, that does not necessarily mean you trash a game on purpose, but if you didn't think that it was that good, this is your opportunity to write about it. Now, one of the easiest ways of reviewing a game is called a segmented review. Segmented reviews are the most basic form of game reviews out there right now. They come in 6 key parts: an intro, a story, your gameplay, your graphics, your sounds and music category. Let's see if I can get that character right. And your closing. Now, as you can see, these 6 categories are basically what you'd find in any typical essay. Only this is not an essay. A segmented review is exactly what it sounds like. This is basically 6 different parts coming together to form one cohesive document that gives your opinion on the game. Now, this is obviously something that you're probably not going to find in any major magazine publication or online reviewing source such as GameFAQs, IGN, and everybody else. They tend to use strict essay reviews. But if you're a beginner and you want something very simple just to get into, segmented reviews are the way to go. This will get your feet wet, get you some experience, and then give you more ability to write an essay review moving forward. Now, one of the first things you want to note about segmented reviews is your intro. Your intro is actually something that I usually recommend that you write last. I say that because after you've already written your story, gameplay, graphics, sounds and music, and closing section, it'll give you a better idea of how you really want to start off your review. For instance, in the case of your story, you may want to make your intro into basically a story segment. Now, you may be thinking, why would I want to do that if I've already got a story section down here? Well, simply put, you could start off by saying, Alex, we'll call Alex our hero, Alex is having a bad day. Yada, yada, yada. Then go into the story of the game. This way, when you get to the story section, you can actually put what you thought about the story. This is a review, so obviously you're giving your opinion. By giving you an intro like that, by opening up with this story segment, you're basically setting yourself up for a hook, a good catch to get people interested in reading your review. Typically, you have about 30 seconds to grab somebody's attention before they'll click away and go to somebody else. So it's imperative in those 30 seconds that you get somebody with your hook, which is why I usually suggest you write your intro last after you've written everything else. Now, some other ideas for your intro are humor. Let's talk about something funny in the game. Possibly a famous quote that has something to do with the game. Or, in my case, for Superman 64 review I wrote a while ago, I wrote something to the effect of, Dad, what's that game in the trash? And then the son would respond. Now, obviously, that's not grammatically correct. There's problems in there. But, for now, we'll leave it at that. So, your intro, as I said, generally comes last. But, let's move on to the story. Your story is very important because a game needs... People who play a game, our generation is typically becoming either 2 segments. Either one segment that likes to blow stuff up in games like Call of Duty, or another segment that likes to actually treat games as fantasies, books. More and more games are thriving off of stories these days. That's why stories are very important, and they also are a very important part of your review. Now, a typical rule of thumb to take when reviewing your story section is that you never reveal something about the game that isn't in the manual. Now you might be going, why? Well, somebody does not want their story of the game being spoiled before they even play it. The story is something that really gives them a good motivation to keep playing the game, and if you spoil that, they're not going to be able to keep playing. That's why you only reveal what the manual says. Basic backstory that's common knowledge to other people. Now, moving forward, after we've written the story section, we'll then move on to gameplay. Gameplay is the most important part of your review because that's what people are typically going to have to live with when they're playing the game. You need to give an unbiased opinion of what you experienced. Well, of course it's going to be biased, but as unbiased as possible, at least in describing how the game plays. So at first you're going to want to describe how the game plays. Now, you may be thinking, well, what does that encompass? Well, that can encompass anything. Does the game have achievements? Does the game... Well, how long is the game? What do you do in the game? What you do. What do you do in the game? Here goes my grammar. Well, after you've... those are just some basic ideas. You can basically go with anything you really want to do. Moving forward, then you're going to, after you've described how the game plays, you're going to say what you thought about those points. Now, rule of thumb is you never review something that you don't at least give some explanation of to your audience. Now, you may be thinking, why would I do that? Well, simply put, your audience is probably not going to know the game from the viewpoint that you had from playing it. That's why you have to explain it to them. After you've explained it even very briefly, you can then talk about it and give your opinion on it. Very important. Some different things that you may want to consider also is the multiplayer of the gameplay, because games with Call of Duty, like Call of Duty, revolve a lot around multiplayer, so you want to put that in there. Definitely look into that. Now, after you've talked about the gameplay, then we go into graphics. Graphics don't have to be full HD to be good, but you do want to describe how it looks. Graphics don't make a game, but they sure help. So, how does the game look? Does the game lag? How colorful is it? What do the characters look like? Honestly, graphics don't just have to be pixels. They can also be artwork. Like, as I said, what do your characters look like? If your characters are uninspiring, you're obviously not going to want to be around them. That's why definitely talk about what your characters look like. Graphics generally won't be a very long section, but make it long enough that at least people can get a good idea of what they're experiencing. Moving forward, we then have our sounds and music section. Sounds and music is a very basic section. Just talk about the sounds, random sounds. For instance, in Call of Duty, you want to talk about what the gunshots sound like. Do they sound realistic? Music, what the tracks sound like. In Final Fantasy, obviously one of the big polls is, what does it sound like? Or one of the big directors composing gigantic orchestrated tracks for it, symphonies. That's something you want to talk about. And again, you could probably combine graphics and sound and music into one paragraph if you're really short on space. But I tend to recommend that you take two. Now, after you've written everything else, you want to finish with a good closing that gives a solid recap of what you've talked about. By giving a recap of what you talked about, you're going to be giving everyone a really good wrap-up. You're going to give them something memorable that they can take with them after they're done reading your review. That's really important because a lot of people just tend to skim. That's what you're going to have. They'll get past the intro up here, but then when they get through here and they start to lag a little bit, they'll tend to just skip down to the bottom. Your recap is really important because you just want to highlight the important points. Don't hit everything, just hit what's important. Recap should be memorable. It should end with a good punchline, something that'll get them leave them with something important, leave a good taste in their mouth. This way they're going to want to come back to read something else from you. Also, just for some fun categories that you can always add on a later date, we want to talk about these categories just so that, for instance, you want to add a little bit of extra pizzazz to your review. For instance, you could do family friendly. I like to think of this category as just a good way to say, does it deserve the rating that it got? Is it really an E-game, for instance? An E-game for everyone. Or in games like Call of Duty's case, does this really deserve an M rating? Obviously, we're not getting into big logistics. This is not meant to spark a flame war. This is just mainly meant to give people an idea of what they're going to be experiencing. There's a lot of blood, violence, stuff like that. Basically, would you want your kid playing this game? Finally, I also like to talk about multiplayer segments. That's becoming incredibly popular. Also, replay value is another good one. As well as replay value, multiplayer, family friendly. Also, buy or rent. Do you think this game is worthy of being a game you buy, or is it simply just like a one-weekend fling? Very important little tracks. Other than that, when reviewing a game, make sure you keep it to about 600 to 800 words, depending on how long your requirements are. I find 600 to 800 words to be a sweet spot. You may have to go a little bit more depending on what your company or place requires, but I generally like that. Little area because it's basically long enough to give people a good idea without boring them to death. Also, remember, good grammar is key. Get somebody to proofread your work. Let your work sit for a day or two before you submit it. Other than that, that's how I would write a review. If you need any questions, post them in the comments section.